One more time, just to remind everybody, I will see you on Friday, right? 10 o'clock. We'll be here. The essay topics for the exam. I want you to be able to discuss the Renaissance. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. What is significant about it? Who are key players in the Renaissance? Give me some names. Why is the Renaissance so significant? How did the Renaissance usher us into the modern age? What is important about the Renaissance? Another essay topic that I'd like you to be prepared for is the Reformation, which we will discuss today. Again, there are more notes on this, so please check the notes online. We won't get into it with the kind of detail that I'd like to get to today, but we're going to discuss it, and of course there's more material online, so be ready for that. So the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the Reformation. Why is it so significant? Who are the key players, or the key player is most notably. And I will make sure that your project grade is in definitely by Friday as well, but let's talk here. The Renaissance. We were talking about Machiavelli when we left off. A good example of a Renaissance man. Machiavelli argues that leaders need to be responsible, that being a leader, being a man in a position of power is not about personal gain and personal benefit and personal wealth. It's about responsibility. And that in reality, politics are not quite what people would like them to be. That in truth, leaders don't have to be capable, they just have to appear capable. They just have to appear capable. Now, Machiavelli is not advocating this necessarily. He's not saying he likes this. He's just pointing out what he sees. Machiavelli argues that in politics, generally, or in life in general, the ends justify the means. We often will do terrible things for what we consider to be a positive result. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs, that sort of logic. And we have to be extremely careful about this. This is frequently used for our own selfish motives, to advance our own selfish motives, rather than to promote the public good. There are certainly situations where, yes, bad things happen in order to produce a positive outcome. Look at World War II, if we're going to use a modern example. Nevertheless, most of the time when people follow that kind of logic, it's not really a positive outcome for anyone but them. Terrible things are done within that context. And Machiavellianism, or to be Machiavelli-ish, however you want to put it, about something, is to say, I'm going to do something terrible, but the positive result at the end is what matters. We use this to justify slavery. We use this to justify warfare. We use this to justify all kinds of terrible things that we do. So we have to watch out for that. Machiavelli wrote a book called The Prince. And it's a story that outlines what he is observing. It's a story that outlines what he is observing. The Renaissance is going to see a surge in economic activity, or happen alongside, in parallel with a surge in economic activity. As people become wealthier, as the middle class recovers, as this youthful population that is recovering from the plague moves into adulthood, and we see more than one generation of it, people are going to become more educated. People are going to advance themselves and invest in themselves more than they ever had before. This logic that I can be a good Christian and still do well in life and not have to feel guilty about it really begins to take hold. And in northern Italy, this becomes the foundation of a very dynamic culture. We start to see people do quite well. We start to see people live in nice homes and have nice things and have comforts and luxuries that simply had not existed among the middle classes before the Renaissance. And these people don't feel guilty about it. They don't feel bad about it. They want to do well in life. They see this as a positive good for society as a whole. Again, provided that you do your civic duty, provided that you are not entirely focused on your own well-being. We see the Renaissance express itself through a major move forward in the arts You know, the Renaissance is often associated with these tremendous artistic achievements. And I want you to keep in mind that just about all of this is, in fact, related to economics. The great Renaissance artists were themselves businessmen, and they are producing these works of art as professionals because this is how they pay their bills. And they're producing these works of art for people that are buying them. And so an artist that does it professionally is in reality just a businessman. That's just the job that they're in. And we need to understand that. We need to understand that. And if you have a particular artistic talent, you can do very well in the Renaissance. You know, painting pictures and making sculptures and providing these kinds of luxury goods for the people that are now doing well in life. The merchants and traders and businessmen and so on and so forth that now are enjoying themselves and not feeling guilty about it. Well, they want pretty pictures to hang on the wall, don't they? And so we see a great surge forward because, again, if you're a better artist than the next guy, if you work harder, if you invest more in your artistic ability, you're going to get more work, aren't you? People are going to pay more for what you create. You will do better in life by becoming a better artist. And so we start to see some artists that are absolutely fantastic, recognized today as some of the greatest that have ever lived. Florence, Italy, which is square in the center of northern Italy, is often considered the birthplace of the Renaissance. Now, any one of these cities could probably claim this. The Venetians, in Modena, however you want to pronounce it, Pisa, there's plenty of cities in Italy that could probably claim this title, but Florence is often given this unofficially. And the Renaissance thrived in Florence. You know, this is really ground zero. And I want to talk about a few artistic figures, and we're going to move a little bit more quickly than I'd like, but we do need to discuss them. One, and here is Florence. Here is Florence then, and then, of course, here's a picture of Florence today. One is a fellow by the name of Giotto. Now, he is pre-Renaissance. He actually lived a little bit earlier than the Renaissance, but his contributions to artistic development simply cannot be overlooked. 1276 to 1337. Giotto painted frescoes, and of course a lot of these guys are painting religious-based paintings, paintings with religious themes. And he develops three-dimensional figures and the illusion of movement. He develops three-dimensional figures and the illusion of movement. Up to this, artists would paint people and everybody's kind of, flat Stanley against the wall. But he is able to change that. And you can see in this one work of his, it looks like the people are moving. And what he does will be built on by his students and by those who admire what he does. Here are a couple of more Giotto works, and you can see we're now in the three dimensions. It looks like people are moving. Religious themes. Another artist that emerges a little bit early in the Renaissance, but is particularly notable, is Brunelleschi. And he was Florentine. He was from Florence. He was a Florentine artist. Like many of these Renaissance artists, he actually wore a lot of hats. He was also an inventor. He was also an engineer. He was an architect. He did a lot of stuff. And Brunelleschi was just brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. Brunelleschi develops mathematic perspective. As we look at objects in the distance, they look smaller. We know that, right? The farther something gets away, the smaller it appears. And so he's able to actually do the math and figure out how to translate that onto canvas. And so his paintings show an image the way it would look if you were looking at it from a distance. And you can see this from one of his sketches, how he's doing the math to figure out exactly how the human eye would interpret a distant object. Brunelleschi is particularly known. His real masterpiece, and this is interesting, the Adoration of the Magi. The Magi are the three wise men. The three wise men that came to see Christ. And you'll notice that one of them is not white. One of the wise men is actually African. And yes, this should be common sense, but Europeans knew of African people. There were black people in Europe during this time, although in very small numbers. But the idea that there are non-whites in the world is most certainly something that the people of Europe are going to be aware of, particularly Italians. There's a lot of trading and a lot of commerce that is taking place. And so the fact that he decides that the Magi are not going to be European, which of course, if you look at the scripture, it's very obvious that they weren't. This is one of the early works in Europe that actually shows non-whites. And so this is really, really interesting. But what Brunelleschi is particularly best known for is the dome of the Florentine cathedral. You know, Florence was a thriving city, and Florence is becoming a wealthy city, and so they build themselves one heck of a cathedral. And in many ways, what they're trying to do is show up Rome. You know, Florence and Rome kind of had a rivalry going on, and so Florence wants to one-up the Pope on this. But the problem is they couldn't figure out how to make the dome. The dome would have to be brick, and of course, if you try to lay bricks in a dome, they're going to cave in. They're going to cave in, particularly while you're trying to set them. And so the Florentine Cathedral actually sat for many years with no roof on it because nobody could figure out how to make the dome work. And Brunelleschi figured it out. You know, Brunelleschi went to him and said, "This is how I'm going to do it." And he is the absolute genius who figured out how to do a brick dome without it caving in on itself, even while it is being constructed. And he developed the mechanisms, the pulleys that would pull the bricks up. He did all of it. And the dome of the Florentine Cathedral is really one of the wonders of the Renaissance era. It is just a masterful design and engineering. And it actually took modern engineers quite some time to figure out exactly how he did it. You know, they can study the bricks and see how they're laid out, but exactly how were they able to lay them while they were being put down without them caving in? And they finally figured out how he did it, but the man was just brilliant. And the Florentine Cathedral is a source of tremendous pride, which is why, if you look at Florence today, there are no tall buildings except for the cathedral. You know, a number of historic cities with notable architectural masterpieces make sure that nothing stands higher than them. If you go to Paris today, for example, there's no tall buildings in Paris because the Eiffel Tower is supposed to dominate the skyline. And so during the 20th century, when skyscrapers started getting built, Paris decided no skyscrapers in Paris. And so the Eiffel Tower will always be the centerpiece. And the same is true in Florence. Do we have a city that has that rule? Anybody know? I mean, we love skyscrapers in the U.S., right? You know, cities, we love big, tall buildings. But there's one city that's particularly important that also has a rule about how tall buildings can be. Does anybody know? D.C. Yeah, Washington, D.C. Yeah, Washington, D.C. If you'll notice, there are no big, tall buildings in Washington, D.C., and that's so the Washington Monument will dominate the skyline. You know, the Washington Monument is the only big, tall building structure, whatever you want to call it, in Washington, D.C. In any event, Brunelleschi is a big step forward. We have Botticelli. We're moving forward in the timeline. Botticelli is also three-dimensional with his paintings. He shows the illusion of movement. He even shows the illusion of wind. The Birth of Venus here is a Greek-themed fresco, you know, the lady emerging from the ocean. Here are some other works by Sandro Botticelli. And the three women dancing in this one is often recreated on mugs and t-shirts and things like that. This one here is particularly interesting. Portrait of a young woman. You know, a very attractive young woman, a very beautiful painting. What makes this significant, though, is that this is not a noble woman. This is not a woman that is of particular importance other than the fact that she belongs to a wealthier family that wants to have her portrait done. And so this is an indication of what the Renaissance really stands for. Individualism, ordinary people doing well in life. You as a particular person, you as you, can do well in life, can make yourself better, can have nice art on the wall. You matter. You matter. And we can see with Botticelli's work, he's using mathematical perspective. He's using all of these techniques that had been developed by earlier artists. How about this one? Van Eyck. Van Eyck. Van Eyck is known for his ability to create what we call photorealism. Van Eyck creates what we call photorealism. Paintings that are so accurate, it looks like a picture. And I'll turn the lights off for this one. And some of you might want to walk up and take a look at the screen since I can't show a big screen. But this one's going to blow your mind. This one is absolutely going to blow your mind. This is the Arnolfini wedding portrait. Again, just a well-off couple who wants to have their portrait done because it is their wedding. This is not, you know, a painting of nobility. This is not necessarily a painting of a religious theme. This is not the Greek gods, which many Renaissance painters embraced because a rediscovery of the Greeks and the Romans were a big part of who they were. This is just a well-off merchant couple who wants a portrait done. And that's what makes the Renaissance so significant. And Van Eyck was doing it because the dude's getting paid. All right, that's what this is all about. He's a businessman, and there you go. By the way, the woman is not pregnant. That's just the way the dress was at the time. The woman is not pregnant. Now, there's some indications that this is a wealthy couple, despite the fact that, I mean, obviously they got their portrait done, but can anybody tell me some other indications here that might show that this is a well-off couple? And you might want to get a little closer. Yeah, the chandelier, right? And that's a pretty expensive chandelier. That's the kind of thing you'd see in a nobleman's home, but they're not nobility, so they're making money somehow. I noticed they put the dog in there. You know, I want my dog in it. You know, just like today. You know, we treat our dogs like children, I suppose. There's oranges in the background. There's oranges in the background. Yeah, citrus fruit is going to be imported because you see, there's something unique about Van Eyck that might stand out when you look at these Renaissance artists. What automatically do you think when I say, you know, Botticelli, Brunelleschi, Giovanni Pico, right? Petrarch, Masaccio, and Van Eyck. What stands out?
His name.
Yeah, his name, obviously. What's going on with the name? Yeah, he's not Italian. That's the trick. He's not Italian. All these other guys are Italian, obviously. Van Eyck is not Italian. He was actually Dutch. He was actually Dutch, so you're close. You know, Van Eyck lived in the Netherlands, and so he's a great master that was not Italian, which is quite unique. Blow your mind, folks. This is how good this guy is. I want you to look at the mirror in the back. I want you to look at the mirror in the back. That is a convex mirror. Okay, it is a dome. It's got a little bit of a dome in it. And if you look at the mirror itself, not only has he painted a mirror that looks like a mirror, go try to do that sometime. The minute you try to paint glass or the minute you try to paint a mirror, you will have a whole newfound respect for what these artists are able to do. Painting a mirror is really hard to do. But he painted the people in the mirror. If you look at the mirror itself, he's actually painting a picture of the people in the room in the mirror. And it looks like they would look in a mirror. That's how photorealistic this is. That's how photorealistic this is. The mirror shows the convex shape of the window and the people in the room and the back of the couple. That's how precise he was with it.
So wait, this zoomed in photo, is that?
That's a zoomed in photo of this in the back, yeah. That's zoomed in of this in the back. Just absolutely stunning in terms of what he was able to. Look at the beads, right? Look at the beads and the shadowing. Those are glass beads hanging down. And he has painted them. He has painted them.
So was a lot of the artists there at the time, was it just like a stylistic choice to kind of paint?
Yeah, he was developing his own style. That's exactly right. He's developing the style that he wants to sell, and photorealism was his bag. So you can understand this was not a man who worked cheap. You know, you're paying this guy for this kind of painting. It's stunning, absolutely stunning. One of his paintings was the subject of a movie made a few years ago called Monuments Men, because during World War II, the Nazis looted all the art that they could find. And one of his paintings, specifically this one here, The Donor's Wife, was part of a larger piece that ended up getting looted by the Nazis. And the movie is about the men from the United States who got into Europe, and it was their job to try to find as much art before it could be destroyed or looted or whatever. And the movie is about them trying to find the donor's wife. And it's a good movie. It's called Monuments Men. And it was a special task force in the U.S. military to try to get the art back as the Nazi regime is collapsing in Europe. And the Nazis were hiding art everywhere and sending it in all kinds of weird places and stuff like that. Raphael. Now, Raphael died rather young. He was only about 30 when he died. This is the Sistine Madonna. This is another very, very well-known work of his. The little cherubs down below, the little angels down there are also recreated on, bath towels and mugs and t-shirts and stuff. Very, very common, but it's part of a much larger work. He particularly painted the Virgin Mary. He particularly painted the Madonna. That was what he wanted to do. And so a lot of his works cover this. And you can always tell Raphael by the shape of the women's faces. The women's faces always have a particular shape to them. This here is the Transfiguration. This is hell, this is Christ's crucifixion, and this is Christ ascending into heaven. Kind of looks like it's hammer time, he's breakdancing, but that's not what's really going on. But if you put MC Hammer music to that, it becomes a lot more fun to look at. Raphael, like I said, didn't live particularly long, but his impact is absolutely remarkable. There's the School of Athens painted by Raphael. He's admiring the Greeks and the Romans, and here are the important figures from the ancient Greek philosophical school. There's Socrates and Plato and all of these others. They didn't all live at the same time, of course, but he's created what he calls the School of Athens. Notice the mathematic perspective. Notice the photorealism of the painting. It's stunning. It's stunning. And that, of course, leads us to a Renaissance artist that I'm sure we've all heard of, Michelangelo. Michelangelo exists on a whole different level than these others that we have already discussed. Michelangelo was an absolute super freak, genius artist. His abilities are well beyond what even the other great masters had. Michelangelo, also born in Italy, he was born into a merchant family. His dad was a businessman that traded goods, things like wool. But he didn't want to go into business. He wanted to go into art, and so he became an artist. But again, these are all businessmen all businessmen. And at a very young age, he was recognized as a prodigy. Even in his teens, it was understood this kid has got something that other artists simply do not have. Michelangelo, first and foremost, considered himself a sculptor. Now, he did obviously paint some things that are particularly noteworthy, but despite his ability with painting, he was actually a sculptor and didn't even like painting. He didn't want to paint, but it was something that he was either ordered to do or paid to do. And his sculptures are considered the greatest of the Renaissance era, if not the greatest that have ever been created. He is particularly well known for David, this giant portrait of the biblical David. This is David from David and Goliath. This is what he has created here. It was a massive, massive piece of marble. All of the other artists had looked at it, sculptors that lived in northern Italy. None of them were willing to take this on. And so Michelangelo took the job. This was supposed to go on the dome of the Florentine Cathedral. That was where they were going to put it. There were going to be a series of sculptures that went around the dome of the cathedral. And that's why David is a little bit out of proportion. His hand, his right hand here is a little bit bigger than it should be because it's designed to be looked up from the ground. And so the proportion would look right if you were looking at it from a distance. But what is the message here? Well, it is one man against the world. It is one man who did something with himself. The story of David and Goliath is one that epitomizes what the Renaissance is all about. David is a poor shepherd boy. He's not a particularly important person, but what is he? He's intelligent. He's hardworking. He invests in himself. When the big, mean Goliath is harassing the Hebrew people, we need somebody to step up. And what does David do? David steps up, right? David is willing to take that risk and take that challenge to fight the powerful Philistine Goliath. And of course, how does David beat Goliath? He doesn't beat him by being stronger, does he? He beats him by being smarter. That's exactly right. David uses his mind to overcome that challenge. I'm smarter than that big dumb guy, and I'm going to beat him because of that. And so David uses his sling and, of course, brains Goliath, kills him, and after that, David is able to eventually become king of the Hebrews. And so here we have David, not as a child, which is how the story depicts him, but as an adult, but that's all right. He's preparing his sling, getting ready to take down Goliath. And so that's what's happening here. He's right about to show Goliath who's boss. And this was actually going to go on the roof of the Florentine Cathedral facing Rome, right? Because again, they have this rival going on. And so Rome is the Goliath and Florence is the David. And so they were going to point this right at Rome. Once this sculpture was completed, it was considered too perfect to go way up on top of the cathedral, so they kept it on the ground. And more recently, like 100 and something years ago, but it was outside for a very long time. But in the modern era, it's been moved into a big museum, and it is giant. Just in case you're wondering how big David is, it is a big sculpture. Just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with here, this is not human size. I mean, David is just massive. David is massive. There's some other sculptures by Michelangelo. This here is Pieta. This is the Virgin Mary, this is Mary Magdalene cradling the dead Jesus. And again, it's just absolutely incredible what this man was able to accomplish. I mean, when you look at this in any detail, it is just mind-blowing how well he was able to sculpt these figures and how perfect he was able to create them. This is marble. This is marble that he has created, and it looks like real figures about to emerge. Michelangelo was 23 years old when he completed this one here. He was 23 when he completed it. Moses is part of one of the Pope's tombs, and look at his hand, going through his big long beard. It looks so perfect. And of course, Moses is tough, isn't he? I mean, Moses is built. There are tendons and muscles in your forearm, and these muscles only emerge whenever you flex your fingers in certain ways. You can, if you move your hand, you see certain bulges start to emerge as the tendons pull the muscles and the muscles contract. And what Michelangelo did was make that absolutely perfect. This is anatomically correct to the most precise detail. If Moses' hand is in this exact position, that is exactly what his forearm would look like with regards to the muscles and the tendons. And Michelangelo knew this because he actually dissected human corpses. He would bring in human corpses and cut them open to figure out exactly how is your arm going to look when your fingers are in a particular position. There's a little scar here on his knee, and it is believed, the legend has it, that whenever Michelangelo was finally finished, that was a final hit that he put on his knee and said, "All right, Moses, arise," and he hit him on the knee. Now, what Michelangelo was equally well known for is painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel is the private chapel of the Pope. It is at the Vatican. Again, Michelangelo was a sculptor. He was not really a painter, but he didn't have much of a choice here. The Pope ordered him to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He was given a directive by the Pope, and at this particular time, when you live in Italy, you don't tell the Pope no. Michelangelo did not like the Pope did not like Michelangelo. Michelangelo was a very strange person to begin with. He didn't really get along with anyone, and the Pope hated him, and he made no secret of the fact that he hated the Pope too. But you're painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and so Michelangelo grudgingly did it, and it took him years to do. And the Sistine Chapel is the ceiling that Michelangelo painted. The rest of the Sistine Chapel has paintings from other artists, including Raphael, but the ceiling was painted by Michelangelo. And it's a series of cells, and in each cell, he put a different biblical scene, all of which from the Old Testament. And this is at the dead center, God creating Adam, and that tension there, right from the finger, God's finger and Adam not quite touching. And what's real interesting about this, nobody noticed this until the 1990s. Nobody noticed this until the 1990s. It is known that Michelangelo hid Easter eggs in all of these paintings. There's all kinds of Easter eggs in here, but one was just discovered, again, not too long ago. This is the cross-section of a human brain. That's the cross-section of a human brain. And for centuries, people had been looking at that picture, and nobody had connected the dots until a neurologist walked through one day and was like, "I know what that is." And so, and the lines within God's figure line up with vessels and nerves within the brain itself, and you can see the brain stem and all of that, which really pretty cool. And you can see the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is right up here. These other paintings were by others, but the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel was Michelangelo's, and it's the masterpiece. It's the masterpiece. There's all sorts of other scenes. Here is the creation of the sun, moon, and planets, God. And then down here is Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden. They're beautiful here in this side, and then once they've been expelled, you'll notice they look old and haggard. They look much worse whenever they're being expelled. The female figures in the Sistine Chapel are very masculine in terms of how they're depicted. The women look very much like men physically, and that's because Michelangelo did use male models, even for the female figures. When he would have models pose for him, he only dealt with male models, and why he chose to make the women look so masculine is only up to him. It might be that because he was super gay, which he was, but that might not be the case. Who really knows? But there's an awful lot here. The creation of the sun, moon, and planets. This is seen, there's a papal throne within the Sistine Chapel. This is right where the Pope sits. And right where you sit, you look straight ahead at this. And so it's kind of seen as another Easter egg. God is mooning the Pope, right? Hey, you, right? That is quite possibly what Michelangelo was doing here. There's another picture of Satan in the Sistine Chapel. On the ceiling. Another one of these cells depicts Satan, and Satan looks exactly like the Pope in that picture. Because again, Michelangelo didn't like him. There's another one where a little cherub is doing that to the papal throne, and that back in the day was the equivalent of giving someone the finger. And so there's a little baby giving the Pope the fig, as they called it. So all kinds of fun stuff. Michelangelo also was the architect of a big section of St. Peter's Basilica and the courtyard in front, those two columns that go around. He wanted that to look like God embracing. God's giving you a big hug. The arms of God are reaching out and embracing the public. And St. Peter's Basilica and the big courtyard in front is still today where the big crowds gather and the Pope lives. This is the papal apartment right here at the Vatican. And this window here is where the Pope often gives addresses, but that's where the Pope actually lives. That's his residence. The Sistine Chapel is right there. The Sistine Chapel is right there. And St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican is massive. It's huge, and it's got an enormous art collection. All kinds of artifacts from ancient Rome. The Vatican archives are just absolutely massive in terms of their historic value. Let's talk about Leonardo, the other great master that existed on a whole different level. Leonardo was, again, none of these guys are what we would call normal. Leonardo was a recluse. Leonardo did not really interact with people very much. He lived very much to himself. He was also unbelievably intelligent and talented. He is best known for the Mona Lisa, of course. That is on your bucket list. You need to go see the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa is not particularly big. The Mona Lisa is only about so big. It's quite small. It's painted on poplar wood. And again, it's significant really because Lisa is just the wife of a merchant. She's the wife of an Italian merchant, decided to have her portrait done, and there you go. There's nothing else that's special about her. That's sort of an indication of what the Renaissance is all about. And what happened is Leonardo painted the Mona Lisa and liked it so much that he never gave it up. He liked it so much that he kept it for himself. But Leonardo has this little smile, this little smirk that she's giving. This is probably the very first depiction of a woman being deliberately sexual. We don't see this. That little flirty smirk is the first time in Western art that a woman has ever been depicted that way. Every other sexy pose, hey baby, everything else in every advertisement, every show, every picture, everything of a woman deliberately, calling you in starts with this little quirky smile that Mona Lisa is giving. This is the first time that a woman has been depicted this way. Other Renaissance painters sketched the painting first and then filled in the sketch. And if you look at a lot of these Renaissance paintings, you can even see the faint little lines that they would draw, kind of like a coloring book. That's how they would do their paintings. Leonardo did not do that. There are no sketch lines. He just painted freehand, and he would do layer after layer of his paint. That's why everything is so smooth. That's why everything is so lifelike. because there are no sketch lines in what Leonardo did. This is what the Mona Lisa would have looked like when it was new, when it was actually painted. Very colorful, very vibrant. This was painted by one of Leonardo's students. It was a copy of the Mona Lisa made by one of his students. So you can see it's close, but it's not quite, is it? You know, if you look at which is a better painting, there's just something very special about the Mona Lisa that makes it just that much better. This is clearly the work of somebody who's trying to get it right. You don't know what it is, but it's clearly there. It's very, very close, tremendous talent, but the Mona Lisa just nails it. And nobody really knows how that talent can be described. He also painted The Last Supper. This is another very famous painting that he did. There's only like 13 or so confirmed Leonardo da Vinci paintings out there. He did not paint many. And this was restored. This was oil on a wall, and over the centuries it deteriorated quite badly, and so it has recently been restored. And there's debate over whether or not it should have been. You know, some people argue that the restoration is not really true to what it should have looked like, and so there's debate over whether the restoration was worthwhile. But nonetheless, this is The Last Supper, and it's the most accurate depiction of the Last Supper, the most notable depiction of the Last Supper. Leonardo was, of course, a prolific note taker. You know, he would write and sketch and do all kinds of work in notebooks, always trying to perfect his art, which is crazy because he did not paint that much. There is the Vitruvian Man, which is trying to get the proportions of the human body. And this was a dead man. This was a corpse. This was a human corpse that he stole from a graveyard and then laid the body out and did sketches on it. We have tendons and muscles, and again, all of this was from a dissected human body. We have a woman that is pregnant with the fetus on the inside. He's trying to figure out how the human body works. We have skulls and hearts and butts, just all kinds of different human positions within his sketches. He would actually sketch in his notebook backward. And so when you hold it up in the mirror, you actually read it forward. That was a little trick that he would do whenever he would take his notes. And he was so skilled, he could freehand in either direction with his writing. Leonardo had all kinds of inventions. Leonardo came up with all kinds of inventions. None of these were ever built during his lifetime, but he invented helicopters, he invented parachutes, battle tanks, pumps to pump water, all kinds of real interesting stuff. And none of it was created during his lifetime, but he just found it very, very interesting. Here's more. Hands. Human hands are very, very hard to draw. And so he was particularly interested in finding the best way to portray human hands. And so although there are only about, I think, something like 13 confirmed paintings by Leonardo, he had a lot of sketches in notebooks. There's lots and lots of sketches in notebooks that are all preserved in various ways. Now, briefly, you're going to have to go over the Reformation in the notes that we posted. Like I said, it's a hybrid class, but I'm going to give you the 10-minute version, but I will expect you to study more on your own. By the 15th century, as we are pulling out of the plague, the church itself is becoming rather corrupt. The church itself is becoming rather corrupt. It's all about the money, and the church is very aggressively seeking wealth and trying to extract as much wealth as it can out of the European population. Not only is everybody required to pay a 10% tithe, you are a heretic if you don't, but the church has all sorts of other techniques to raise money. One of which is called the sale of indulgences. In very simple terms, it is a Machiavellian way to get out of sinning. If you donate money to the church, you can go out and be a bad boy, and God will look the other way. And the end result is the church gets money, and it's all beneficial. So if you want to go out and sin, it doesn't count if you're willing to give the church money in advance. And the end result is a net positive for the church. And the sale of indulgences was ramped up significantly during the 15th century. It had been going on for a while. It dates back to the Crusades, but at this point, the church is really pushing the sale of indulgences. The church also comes up with purgatory. Those of you that are Catholic will be familiar with this. Purgatory. Purgatory is heaven's waiting room. Purgatory feels good. I like purgatory. It's a nice feeling. Because you see, none of us are perfect, are we? There's all those things that we're not too terribly proud of, but we know we did. But nobody in here is an axe murderer, right? Nobody in here is an absolutely horrible person, but nobody in here is perfect. And so the really bad people, yeah, they go straight to hell. Yeah. But if you're one of those people in the middle, yeah, you've done a few things you're not proud of, but come on, do I really deserve to be categorized with Hitler? You go to purgatory, which is the waiting room for heaven. Only the best among us go into heaven right away, but most of us get to wait in purgatory. And if you get to purgatory, eventually you are let into heaven. And it's a way to comfort people who know they're not perfect, but don't believe that hell awaits them. Just because of, that thing I did a few years ago that I'd really rather not talk about. I see y'all cheating on my tests. Don't do it. That's a sin. Not y'all, not this class, but the other class. I've seen that from time to time. Well, how does purgatory make money for the church? Well, you can buy your way out. If you don't want to spend time in purgatory, give the church some money and God will let you into heaven sooner. You can write a check, put you right in the front line of heaven's gates. Now, there was a German priest by the name of Martin Luther. And Luther lived in the German town of Wittenberg. Now, in German, W is pronounced with a V. When you see W and you're speaking German, you pronounce it V. So we would call it Wittenberg, but they would call it Wittenberg. Luther was a priest, but he was also a professor. He was a theological scholar and a very well-educated man. He didn't actually have a congregation. He was actually a university professor, although he was an ordained priest. And not all priests did have congregation. Priests did a lot of stuff during this era. Plenty of priests were involved in education. Priests went to monasteries. There were a lot of things that priests did that didn't involve directly having a church. And Luther was obviously very, very aware of the indulgences and the selling out of purgatory and stuff like this. And this bothered him very greatly because he knew the scripture and he read the scripture, and this did not sound like something God would approve of. This is clearly not what Christ was talking about when he preached salvation and faith. It looks to me like the church is just trying to make money here. It looks to me like this is just a cash grab. There was a man that came to town named Johann Tetzel. Tetzel was an indulgence salesman. He wasn't even a member of the clergy. He wasn't a priest himself. The church would hire people to go around and sell indulgences in return for a commission. That is how corrupt this had become. And don't let me go over time, folks. I don't have my phone with me. And so what Martin Luther did was challenge Tetzel to a debate. This was deeply disturbing to him, what he saw. And so he challenged Tetzel to debate a number of these theological issues. He specifically wrote out 95 topics, 95 theses that he believed needed to be reformed. And he nailed this challenge to Tetzel on the door of the local church. Now, that was not particularly bold. The door of the church was like a community bulletin board because everybody goes to church. But it was a bold move in the sense that he is challenging church doctrine by nailing the challenge to the door of the church itself. And this is one of their own. This is a priest doing it. And one of these debate topics is, should the sale of indulgence be something the church should do? I don't think that this is right. But there's many other topics he wanted to debate. Well, Tetzel didn't take him up on the debate. Tetzel ain't going to deal with this nonsense. Tetzel left town. But the 95 topics were read. The 95 topics were copied. Turns out an awful lot of other people are thinking the same thing. And I know we're out of time, but what this does is it starts a movement within northern Germany to break away from the Roman Church and form their own. At first, of course, Luther tried to work with the church. All of a sudden, he found himself at the head of this reform movement, which was not what he really wanted to do. But when the church refused to cooperate with him, refused to discuss this, eventually he was excommunicated because he wouldn't shut up. He had to go into hiding for a while, of course. But powerful noblemen and powerful men in northern Germany were willing to protect him. And before you know it, we end up with a new church, the Lutheran Church, a non-Roman Catholic Christian church that takes off in northern Europe. And although there had been other attempts to reform the church that had been squelched, the Lutheran Church becomes too powerful for the Catholic Church to suppress. And so now we have the Protestant Reformation. We have Christians in Europe that are not Roman Catholic. Now, I'll just let you know real quick, I won't get into the other changes, but eventually the Reform movement becomes so powerful that the church itself has to reform. And in 1545, over the course of many years, the church had what was known as the Council of Trent. And that's when the Roman church got rid of selling indulgences and all of this bad stuff. And so the church reformed itself. And I know we're out of time, but it is the printing press that is going to make the Protestant Reformation possible, because Luther's 95 Theses were copied on the printing press, which is specifically modernized at this time with movable type. And so it is the ability to print off mass copies of these ideas that enables the Reformation to spread. And before you know it, mass copies of Scripture is being spread out as well. So there we go. All right, it looks like we're out of time, aren't we? Okay, folks, I will see everybody later. I will see you on Friday at 10. Please study more about the Protestant Reformation. I really just touched the surface here. There's other figures that you need to know, so if you want to write that essay topic, it's on you. And it has been a real pleasure. We'll talk on Friday. All right, yeah, you too. All right, let's check yours out real quick. I will log in and figure out what's going on. Yeah, you made 100 on your carry.